All right, so we're off for the bang. Hope you guys feel better about who is going to be teaching you to be a better pilot. Getting into gear selection now. There's a couple of videos I'm going to be putting up as we do the theory behind this, or some of the explanations, and I'll put some of the links up that I filmed at the field. Putting out the glider, checking out the equipment. But pretty much, I think the first question that always pops up when I do the first call and speak to someone that's interested in flying paramotoring, he's asking me, what the price is of the training. And my reply to that, first off, is you can get used, you can get new equipment, but what do you want to use it for? What is your expectation? I need to know what your expectation is. If your expectation is to travel down to the beach on your holidays or fly at the club, then the range of equipment you can get is quite wide. And I'm going to suggest right off the bat that you look at a machine that is designed for weight shifting, that you don't have to worry about the reliability of it. The reputation in the market doesn't really matter, as long as you know that there might be more service intervals over the lifetime. If the engine goes off, you just glide down to the field or the beach. You're not going to have a worry. You can save yourself a ton of money rather than buying an expensive piece of kit that is designed and is engineered to be more reliable. So there's a wide usage, I would say, and diverse expectation by pilots, and I need to know what that is. So you need to decide what you want to do, because the one thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to buy and halfway through the course you decide to sell. So you've got to get something that meets your expectation. There are guys that, just right off the bat, they say, well, this is what I want to fly cross country. So I'm gonna advise him on the best cross country machines, and there's obviously a price scale. Not all machines are designed to be cross country machines. Not all machines are designed to be weight shift sport flying machines. Some are better at both those different options, and it's very difficult to get a jack of all trades machine. There's only one in the market that is a jack of all trades, that you could adapt, you could change things out in order to make it useful for whatever the goal is. But still, even at that, it's, you can still go look at a machine that's got an incredibly powerful unit that's just sucks fuel. Doesn't really matter how much fuel it uses, because you're a sport pilot. You just want to fly on the beach and have fun. You want maximum climb rate, get up to high, maybe do tricks and turns eventually when you finish with your license. So you see what I'm saying? The expectation has to match. Now, when it comes to schools, for example, in the Nirvana Aero School, I try and talk. It's not always a choice. It's always the best for me if we get the right equipment selected for the student. He buys the equipment, he does the training on his own equipment, because you can have the best experience. I mean, it's almost impossible for schools, but some schools do have the ability to have tons of equipment, because we get to the first point, and that's when it comes to wing selection, you have to be within the weight range to do training on a specific wing. So if you went out there and you bought the wrong wing, you're overweight on a wing, then I'm not going to allow you to take off at my school with it, or try to, or attempt to. So you have to be within the manufacturer's recommendations of the weight range. And if you don't do that, if you decide to train self and you're flying a wing that you are overloaded on, then all that's going to happen is that you're going to get an extended ground roll. You're not going to get off the ground, and it's going to cost you parts and money, and eventually you're going to walk away from the sport. This sport has so many people that bail on it simply because they got stuck into the wrong reasoning, the wrong approach when it comes to selecting equipment. So what I try and do is I try and have a bouquet of wings that are all trainers. So that's what you train on. You train on what is traditionally called in the paragliding world, was called an ENA. You could train on an ENB class wing. You do not train on an ENC class wing or an intermediate wing. That's what you don't want to do. If you get past 100 hours, 100 flights, no problem, get into intermediate wing. There are some really fantastic intermediate wings now which actually fall within the category of, some manufacturers are actually changing their scale to say that some of these wings are actually, bordering just past your first flights, and you can get into the next class wing. So it's not a complete intermediate wing. There's actually wings that actually shows you how much experience you need. And if you select a size bigger, then you actually it downgrades itself into a trainer wing. But as far as the school is concerned, I would put you on a DGAC qualified wing, certified wing, which is meant for training and manufacturing. If I put you on a wing and send you airborne and you're flying a wing that is not meant for training and you get hurt, then I can get sued and face legal issues here in this country. In the rest of the world, it's not a big deal. I've seen guys in Thailand train on Hadron XX advanced wings. For you guys for this tuning into this channel for the first time, I don't know what an Hadron XX is. You need to be Maverick plus a lifetime of additional experience in order to be a super hot pilot on a Hadron XX. It is the pinnacle of your career. You get onto something like that. If you try and train on something like that, bad idea. I've the previous importer for the US sold 2 students that came to South Africa. They sold them 2 Hadron XX wings. And they came here to me and they said, they don't know what the sport's about. It's a piece of crap. Just get rid of the gear. We can't get airborne. Sold them Hadron XX wings to train on. It's just ludicrous. And it's because it's in a country where there's no regulations about it and it doesn't give a shit whether the student stays in the sport or not. I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to dig into it. But the point is that you train on a training wing because you want an experience that'll keep you in the sport. All right, so you get the wing selection is weight range. You stay within the manufacturer's minimum and maximum weight. A lot of guys ask me, all right, this wing he gives me a suggestion of what he's found on the net. And he says to me he's a bit low on the low end of the weight range. So what's going to happen is you will get airborne. You will be able to fly with it. But with an oversized canopy, there are certain symptoms that'll come to light when you get airborne. Because and it actually just starts with you could have some, if it's combined with some other issues, which we'll get into when we get onto that subject, it could get into some terrible situations. You can't get off the ground because of gyroscopic precession that is caused. If you have an oversized glider and a other combination of things, which I'm not going to talk about now. So if you're on the low end of a glider or below the low end, if the weather gets a bit bumpy or a bit rough, you'll start feeling that the risers are being pulling you back and forth and pulling you around in the seat. It gets incredibly uncomfortable. It's unstable because the wing it doesn't have enough wing loading. There's not enough wing loading on the glider to keep it stable and keep the canopy in the shape that will be aerodynamic or will be flyable. So you don't want to be below the minimum of a weight range. Same thing about if a guy flies a tandem glider and he's below the minimum weight range. Not a good idea. He's going to have a very rough experience and you can start getting collapses on it. So you don't want to be below the minimum weight, and then you get the maximum weight. Training on any wing that is on the maximum end of the wing load, you need to know you're going to run more, and it's better to be about halfway between the lowest and the highest weight range that a manufacturer recommends. Some of the gliders right off the bat that I can mention that are good to look at would be something like the Dudek Universal or the Dudek Solar or the Ozone Roadster, for example. Those are 3 very well-known wings within the training community. Even the Dudek Nemo is a really good glider, but I don't really sell them so much because you get tired of it rather quickly after you've done your license. So I'd rather recommend something like the Dudek Solar that'll last you into your career. I'm not here to keep on making money out of you because you get tired of a product and you want something else. So a Dudek Solar is a really popular glider, but a Roadster 3 is also a really nice glider to look at. So key points to look out for is the weight range. You've got to be within the weight range that you want. We've already spoken about the machine, so we get onto the topic of the machine. It needs enough power to get you airborne. So if an instructor and an expert would be able to say to you, listen, if you've selected something like the Top 80 or one of these 80cc engines or a 100cc or a EOS 100 or a 125, something like that, where you don't have a lot of horsepower, you got something like 17 horsepower, something like that, then a larger wing is required to get you a little bit more lift. I don't like working on those calculations. I don't think that is a favorable way of approaching the sport, is to make up for horsepower by buying a bigger wing. I don't think that is practical. I think you should buy the correct equipment right off the go. So how much is enough horsepower? Enough horsepower, by my calculation, and out of my experience, is that when you step on the speed bar and you still have a little bit of climb rate. Now, a student would know that because he's very far from using a speed bar and he's never flown before because he's going to start his training. So therefore, it's good to ask advice on something like the Dudek Wingman channel, dudeckwingman.com. I'll put the description up here. You can ask the experts if you found a wing which is the right size for them to use, combined with your motor, how much horsepower that's going to put out. So it's good to get some expert advice within the market when it comes to that. What is enough horsepower? If you overdo it and just say, listen, just give me the strongest engine out there, it just translates to climb rate. And let me explain that. So how does flying work? How does the principle of flight work? If you throttle up, throttle is you keep on climbing. To reduce your altitude, you just slowly let go of the throttle and you'll start sinking. To fly level is you select the correct amount of power to be able to do that. For takeoff, it is 20% brakes. That's like engaging the flaps of the aircraft and pulling back on the stick. Pulling back on the stick with an aircraft is the equivalent of pulling 20% brakes so that you can pop up into the air. You hold that until you get to 70 meters and then you ease off the brakes and you select the right amount of power, because it's always max power for takeoff to get airborne. So if you've got something like a Nitro 280, which puts out an enormous amount of power, or a 303 Polini, you've got a ton of power, which you most likely will not use all of it, but it's great to have that power to get you up in the air, and then it will just translate to climb rate. It won't translate into speed. More throttle is not more speed unless you have a wing with a speed bar or some form to press, that can engage more speed. So you'll pull the you'll decrease the pitch of the wing in order to fly straight and fly faster, and that's where the technology comes in with the advanced wings, where they are tapping into more speed and you need more power to keep up with that speed, because the wing's profile is changing a little bit when it gets to those enormous amounts of speed that they're trying to get to. So that's where power becomes more relevant. If you're a very big guy, makes no sense at all to buy a small engine. You buy a big engine because you might not have enough power to get airborne, and just translate into running more. So we can give you a bigger wing, like a tandem wing, to get you airborne. It's a very bad example to do something like that. I had a pilot here that I saw flying with another instructor. He didn't have enough power, but they put him on a tandem wing. He weighed 140 kilos. What does that translate to? 300 pounds, something plus. So the problem with that is that you can get airborne, but it's not necessarily a good recipe, because you're running that engine at its max RPM for extended periods of time. And if the engine isn't designed or doesn't have the cooling to keep up with that enormous amount of RPM and pressure that you're putting on the engine, then it can burn out, it can seize. So you don't want that. Power is a friend to you, but also fuel economy is a friend to you in other sense as well. That's why I said there's various factors that you got to take into account to select the correct engine. Now, I know there's a lot of students already watching this video saying, but Eugene, you just bombarded me with information. So what am I supposed to do? So number one is, if you want to fly cross-country, buy a cross-country machine where fuel economy is prioritized, but you've got enough power to get you airborne, and your instructor will help you make sure, or we will help you with getting the right knowledge base on that. There are various motors that you could look at. So there are a lot of great options in the market, but your weight is important. Your body weight is important. There's a motor which is popular for someone that is 100 kilos or 200 pounds plus. There's a motor that's preferred for that. There is a motor that is preferred for smaller guys. But it's very important. There's some other aspects that you need to focus on. Your harness needs to be the right size. I get guys that come to me on the course and he's got a huge harness, but he's a tiny guy. Can't work. We can try and close that harness to be as small as possible on your body. But what you are asking for is a effect what's called gyroscopic precession. And that is where you are you are yawing basically on the x-axis because of I'm going to explain that mathematically to you guys. But you are basically, the wings keeps flying straight, but you are getting a yaw action on your motor because you're thrusting up on a machine. You don't fit quite nicely into the harness. So getting the right harness is incredibly important. Make sure you fit into it and that you're the right size for it. Then on the cage size, again, getting to tiny guys, 150 centimeters, Tom Cruise type pilots, smaller guys, you want a smaller cage. Get yourself a 115 or a 125 cage. Don't go for a 130 centimeter cage. Do not go for a 150 max MAV because somebody on YouTube showed you, oh, this is fucking shit. Just look at this big engine, all this thrust. Bullshit. It's bullshit. If you are a small guy, you want a small cage because you do not want a big cage to hit you on the calves, and you don't want to chop your ankles off. How many guys do I have to see now chop their ankles? So you hear what I'm saying? Your feet goes back towards where the prop is, because a lot of these guys design the frames separate from the engine. The prop's very far away from the cage, and they get to chop their ankles. So try and select a cage which is the right size for your body weight, so you are comfortable to fly safely and in the long term with that machine. It's not a rant. I'm just telling you, cage size does matter. It's important if you're a shorter guy to get a smaller cage. Don't force yourself into it. I've got the saying on the class, if it's a fact, write it down. Write it down on paper. I'm short. Write it down. Look at it. Okay? You can't change the fact that you're short. Don't try and convince yourself that you're tall. So what size cage is right for me? What is going to be the best thing for me to fly? All right. That is important. Don't try and talk yourself into something which isn't going to be best suited for you. Okay, so if you're a big guy, you're a big tall guy, it helps getting a bigger cage like a Max MAV cage where it's 150 centimeter, you got more thrust that comes out of that engine. If you are 6'2", 6'3", whatever else, it's fantastic to have that big cage. And you can have a bigger prop on the engine. You can have a smaller engine with a bigger prop, and you can actually get more thrust out of that engine. You're making use of the engine's performance more effectively because you can put a bigger size prop onto it, but it only works when it's taller pilots. All right, so there's a couple of things then that when you look into your machine, it is right amount of horsepower, it is the right size harness, it is the right size cage that you look at. Now, left or right-handed throttles, different machines give you left and right-handed throttle options. Some you can have both options, others just come with a simple, it's a set way. You either have a left or a right. If you're a photography guy, your expectation is to do photography. If you have a left-handed throttle, it's better for photography because a camera is made to take with the right hand. So if it's the opposite, then you have that problem. So there's little things. These little things are important to remember for you in the long term because you don't want to sell your machine after you're doing training. So instructor, if he can select you the right machine, he should not put you on a machine that is incorrect for your size and body. It's important to train on the right piece of kit. Okay, so we've covered wing and machine. So we've covered the suitability for what you want to use it for, cross-country flying or sport flying. Now let me explain just shortly. I'm going to summarize that again. Cross-country flying is endurance machines that are meant to have limited fuel usage. So you're trying to reduce fuel usage, not by pouring more fuel into the tank, but by having an engine that is running with better endurance, better fuel consumption. So that is your cross-country goal to meet. And you've got to find out what the figures are on the different machines and study those figures and then make a choice on that. If you're flying a XC sport class machine, then weight shifting is fantastic. Now weight shifting, it connects with the arms. So you got weight shifting means that you've got low hang points or medium hang points, but you're connected to swing arms. And with that, if you lean and you shift your center of gravity over the swing arm, the wing will start turning. And that's a lot of fun for pilots. It comes from the paragliding side because paragliders are weight shift capable pieces of equipment, of aviation platform. And so it comes across that a lot of pilots that do paragliding like the weight shift ability to be able to lean over the swing arms, and that changes the direction. If you're a photography guy, you don't like that because you want a stable flying platform. If you're in the military and the special forces and you want to shoot at stuff, then you don't like aiming and turning at the same time. That's not what our platform is for, by the way. We do not do what some terrorists and whatever else do, but we do have some proper military forces in the world that use equipment, and that's why they fly differently. High hang points is not swing arms setup. You can get arms, fixed arms, with high hang points, but the high hang points usually comes onto hooked into the harness itself. That is a better platform for cross-country flying because you usually hook in around where your shoulders are. You cannot shift your center of gravity over that point, and therefore you don't have weight shiftability. But the big plus is that whatever the wing is doing is that comes through the swing arms. It comes through the swing arms, it's not the swing arms, the risers. And so if it's thermics and the wing is doing all of that work, jumping up and down, trying to stay stable and within its profile, if that keeps happening, it goes into your high hang points, but that's loose harness setup. It's connected to your harness, and therefore it's much more comfortable to fly with high hang points in rough conditions for cross-country flying. So a lot of guys, I told you guys that this is a regulated sport in South Africa. There's a regulated curriculum and test and exam. So remember the answers I'm giving you here. I'm not feeding you false information. High hang points is for cross-country flying. Swing arms, medium, low hang point swing arms is for sport class flying where you want to do weight shifting. It's better for weight shifting to be able to do that. All right, so that's the only things we're going to cover on those 2 points, but it's very important that you select what you want to do right from get-go. Can you fly cross-country? That's another question I get quite often. Can I fly cross-country with a low or medium hang points machine? Absolutely, 100% you can. It's going to be less comfortable, but you 100% you can. So it's not that you have to, that you can't use the cross-country machine for having fun at the beach. They're just as much fun. But the point is that the two systems are more specialized into different directions. So just keep that in mind when you do your selection on equipment. Assembly of the machine. Now you get machines that are quick assembly. You get machines that come apart very quickly, and therefore they usually have netting which is less popular, like the Nirvana system on the Instinct and the F-Lite. They have this fish netting which comes with ratchets that come in. A lot of pilots are stressing that something's going to go through that netting into the prop. It's not a case. I've never seen it, never ever seen that happen ever. But you do have the other different type of netting, which is what we call fish net netting, and that's what you'll have on something like the Air Conception or the Parajet. The Maverick systems, for example, they are better forms of netting, but they take longer for assembly. So if assembly is key, then go for a unit that is quicker assembly but has got worse netting. Pros and cons to everything. The fixed netting is usually a longer form of assembly. So if you're the type of guy that has to pack up his machine the whole time and travel somewhere, that's a point of consideration for you. We're going to get into, so when you get onto the course and your instructor's most likely going to do your assembly, you're going to make sure that you assemble according to what the manufacturer tells you in the manual. Do not be scared to read a manual. RTFM, read the fucking manual. That is an incredibly important saying. Make sure that you've assembled it correctly and you put every bolt where it needs to be and put something in every hole that is present. So when we get into the checks for the physical equipment, now, there's two situations that you have. You might have bought a second-hand piece of equipment, or you bought brand new. When it's brand new, you're going to have a run-in process. Whereas if it's a second-hand piece of kit, you need to make sure of what the history is. Well, you never get a situation where the owner or the seller is going to be honest about the history of the machine. So it's up to you to check if everything is in good nick. We're going to start with the harness, make sure that the harness is in good condition and that there's no damage, visible damage to the harness. You want to check that your buckles are functional. Just give you guys a good idea is buckles, your straps. Now your connection points to the machine, are they in good nick? You want to check those. In the case of the F-Lite, I can check these, but we're going to go over swing arms in just a second. Okay, so the connection points work well. So harness visual check, and then we're going to move on to, if it's an electric start machine, this is why I've got the F-Lite out here, you're going to have to do a battery check. So taking out the battery, if it's an Instinct or another type of battery, then you're going to take it out. I do have a Parajet here with a battery electric start as well. We're going to talk about that. So you got to check the condition of the battery.
Doesn't help that you have a battery that has got a dead cell in it, and it's going to disappoint you when you get to the field. Next thing you're going to get into is you're going to check the condition of the fuel lines. As you can see with this machine, these fuel lines are on good neck. We are going to have a technical video. This is pretty much just your pre-flight check to make sure that if you're going to get into or go to a school, the instructor is going to check this. But it's up to you to make sure that you don't waste your time getting to a school and something isn't right. So to know if your fuel lines are on good neck and you're not going to need to replace them, you should be able to pinch them. If they are discolored, you see, for example here, these lines are discolored, but you can still pinch them. All right. Usually when fuel has been lying in these lines, they get discolored, but as soon as you can't pinch them anymore, it means it needs to be replaced. So both those lines are good. Visual connection is that usually the bolts have little markings on them, and you just want to make sure that those are all lined up and that there's no loose bolts on the engine. It would be great, and it would be my advice, that you have a service before you go to the school with the machine, whatever machine you've purchased. But you want to make sure that your gaskets and everything is in place. We're going to talk about the service intervals, and we are going to get into technical, but so this is just a preliminary inspection. So you want to check your harness, you want to check your fuel lines, you want to check that there's no damage. If you've got a primer, that there's no damage to the primer, because that can cause an engine out. You want to check the condition of your exhaust. It's not as important with the Nirvana range, but you would need to check the exhaust for any cracks, a visual inspection on it, and if the engine does have or does produce a louder sound, if you do know what's the engine sound like, if it's producing a sound that sounds a bit foreign to it, make sure that you can see if there's any cracks in the muffler or problems like that. Then your fuel tank. A lot of machines, you can get fuel tanks that look like crap, and it looks like there's been some damage to it. Make sure that you don't have a leaky tank, and you can just do a visual inspection on that. But when you pour the fuel into it, you most likely will get an idea if the fuel comes out somewhere that you got a problem there. All right, propeller. If you've got any nicks in the propeller, if there are no cracks or no nicks in the propeller, that's what you want to see. If you have cracks or fill-ins, then you might have a situation where the prop has been hit, the pilot's been trying to fix it with super glue or with some epoxy, and it is possible to do it, but it might be out of alignment, and that's something that you got to look out for. So yeah, be aware of checking the condition of the prop. If it's your machine and you've been flying it and you see a crack like that, it can be fixed. Don't fly a prop that's out of balance. It's just going to cause other problems because that vibration flows through to the engine. All right, lines. Now, lines and netting, you got different types of lines and netting. We're going to go over the other machine in a second. So if these lines are there for a reason. A lot of pilots think that the reason why these lines exist is for the prop, for your hand not to get to the prop. In actual fact, these lines serve a purpose to make sure that the brake cannot get through these lines into the prop. There's pros and cons to the kind of netting. This is not the strongest netting you can get, but remember what the purpose of it is. If your brake line will be stopped by the netting, that's what you want. You don't want a cage that doesn't have netting. We're not going to get into what is the best type of this or the best type of that. It's just basically that you want to check the condition of the netting and everything is connected, because sometimes one of these things could be hanging loose and the prop catches it, and it just, it's a problem for training if you start off with your training and having issues with it. This is the Parajet machine, and the reason why this is a good machine for me to showcase is simply because it's been used for a while, and it's good to have something that's got a bit more wear and tear on it and to show what is necessary to service on these machines. So you've got to make sure that your strut connections are in place and that they don't just come out from itself. You want to make sure that the harness is in good nick and that there is no damage, the same way we did the visual on the Airflights harness. And then we get to the swing arms, and what you actually need to do in these swing arms is, before we get to doing a hang test and balancing and putting yourself at the right angle for flight training, which is an essential part before you even start, would be to check the condition of your swing arms. There are no cracks in the swing arms, because a lot of pilots, that sell their machines have put these machines through through their paces, and they could have caused cracks within the swing arm, and that's a problem that could materialize in a much worse condition for you in the air. We're getting to the netting. Now this machine's netting is in good nick. There's a hole in the netting on this side. That's not a major issue, but it can easily be fixed. And obviously what you'd like to do is you could just take a cable tie and you can stretch it up, make sure that it's nice and tight before it catches onto the prop for some reason. This exhaust has been repainted a little bit, but as you can see here, this is what happens when you repaint an exhaust and the carburetor is positioned above it, because using carb cleaner, the carb cleaner flows over the exhaust and it damages the paint. Not an issue at all, but on the Moster, especially on the Moster, you want to check the condition, and sanding down the exhaust is a good idea, just to make sure that you check the condition if there are any cracks in the exhaust. If you're going to get a problem on the exhaust with the Moster, it's most likely going to be in the vicinity around here. You do have the newer versions of this exhaust where I believe the problem has been addressed, and there's an extra joint been put in place, but the services here is kind of critical. After every flight, you need to be able to do this on the exhaust. You want to be able to push this back and forth over the joint there in order to get a bit of movement there onto it. So in the servicing, obviously, my advice will always be get a fresh service after you've purchased the machine. But these are the kind of visual checks that you do before you get into training. So you want to make sure your fuel cap, your fuel tank is in good nick. I will always advise that if an exhaust is this close to a tank, that you put some form of reflective material over the tank, between the tank and the exhaust. I've got another machine that I'll showcase to illustrate that. Hopefully I can still illustrate that. So that is just some form of insulation material that'll stop if you have an extremely hard landing on your bum when the exhaust is this close to the tank, that if the frame bends into the tank and there's a rupture, that there's not a critical situation where a fire could exist or can become a reality. Fuel lines, again, fresh service on this. The fuel lines are on great nick. Your gaskets are really, really important. So your visual check on this, these bolts are in place in the right way. We'll cover all of that in the technical session, and I'll talk about how this is serviced and what is the correct method on it. Okay, so we've checked the netting, we've checked the harness, we've checked the exhaust, we've the prop. I'm not going to check the prop on this one because it's brand new. It's not necessary to do. And here, for example, is the battery of the machine. It's disconnected now, but you'll just plug it in, and this is a complete different battery than you would have on the F-Lite, for example. Now this is very important for me to mention. I'm just going to switch over like this. What's important about the batteries, you can't swap out a battery from a Parajet, for example, which in this case would be a lithium battery. You can't take a lithium battery and put it onto, that's a LiPo battery. The LiPo battery, you can't put a LiPo battery on, for example, an Instinct, Nirvana Instinct. You can't take an Instinct NiCad battery and put it on the F-Lite. The charge rates are different. Now with the Moster, it doesn't charge the battery, but on the Instinct, for example, there is a charge rate that comes from the engine to the machine on the Simonini engines, and it could explode. It could cause a huge fire. And I do have a case on record of knowing that happened. So don't swap out batteries. Stick to what the manufacturer says always. All right, one more thing to mention on this would be the pulley belt. Now the pulley belt, the way to check that would be to roll it over and just make sure that there are no rips in the pulley belt. Now this has got a clutch, which makes it nice to do the check on the pulley belt. You've checked your exhaust, you've checked, if you want to check your engine to make sure if it's still flyable before the service, or if there's a problem after the service, is to check for any oil leaks on the head or on the cylinder gaskets. So the head gaskets over there, the cylinder gaskets over here. and you want to check that there are no fuel leaks. Usually it just makes it like dried fuel. The oil will still show itself. And on the exhaust as well, you might see that more prominent here. That might not indicate an issue, because this is actually a loose joint that's just held into place with these springs, and these are brand new springs, so there aren't any issues here. But I'll show you guys what it looks like if it's got a bit of a mess there and it needs a bit of attention. The part of the startup is going to be the startup process on your machine. Is obviously, I mean, that's the first thing that everybody does, is that you've got to make sure that the harness is the right size for you, and you've got to make sure that the cage size is correct for you as well. If you're a tiny guy, it's going to be a bad idea to have a huge cage. It just doesn't work well, because this eventually catches your calves when you try and run with it. So it's not a brilliant idea to have a huge cage. The harness is important to have the right size because of an effect that you call the gyroscopic precession effect. If your harness is too big, your wing is too big, and you have an underpowered engine, you could develop gyroscopic precession, especially on low hang points or swing arm connections. The higher this is, like the Parajet is a great height because of these S-bars, and it reduces the effect. But if you're going to have an oversized harness with a small pilot in it, bad idea. You're opening yourself up for gyroscopic precession. Okay, so we'll get into that section when we get to the actual hang point, the doing of the hang points. But this was just a visual check to make sure that these spars are on good neck, that they, for example, I don't like, for example, something like that. It's got to be in place and shouldn't be able to come out easily. You shouldn't have any loose wires or anything that looks foreign to it. And the next step is, oh, here's your primer as well. So the next step is going to be to run the engine. And you're actually going to spend quite a bit of time on the engine when you run it on the ground, because rather run it in on the ground and make sure that it's good on the ground than in the air. So if it's been used, it's not an issue. You run and set the carburetor correctly. We'll get to, on the technical session, we'll do carburetor settings. But on this, what I'm just saying is that if it's a used machine, you don't need a run-in process. You need carb settings. If it's a brand new machine, you'll have a run-in process, which is the very first day of your training. Most likely, it depends, you know, for example, myself as instructor, I don't do running process in the beginning. I start with wings, and when we finish with wings, we move over to machines. All right, so that is your glider fold out, your line checks, your machine checks, your battery checks. Everything there is done, and we're moving on to the next part.
When we get to low hang points machines, and we'll do a physical on that. Whereas what we'll do is with low hang points and medium, any swing arm connection point, you have to do a hang test. You got to do it with high hang points as well, but it's not as important as it is with, or as critical as it is with swing arms. Simply because the amount of the angle, and I'm going to put a link into this video, which is done by the company Scout, which is incredibly detailed on explaining the degree and amount of hang back that there should be of the machine. Once you're in the machine and you're hanging from a hang test platform, then there's going to be a little bit of a gradient that the machine leans back at. If you're completely upright, that is incorrect. That's not what you want, because what will happen is when you take off, you'll lean and you'll fall forward. The cage will press up against the risers, and you can get those brakes. You can get your hands actually stuck between the cage and the risers. So it's important that the hang test is done correctly. There's a bit of an angle, as they call it, where there's a bit of a degree leaning backwards, but not too far as well, because that induces another problem that can cause gyroscopic precession and a yaw, turning on the yaw moment. On the x-axis, a yaw turn on the x-axis. That's not what you want. So leaning too far backwards is a problem. Leaning too far forward is a problem. You want to be just at the right place. Now put that link into the description. Have a look at that video. Very good expert that was explaining, the owner of Scout was explaining that. It's no point in me doing that whole thing when there's a great resource to do that on the swing arms. On the high hang points machines where you're hooked into the harness, you're wearing the machine like a suit. There is no arms that's connected to it. So basically, you still want a lean back on the harness, on the whole setup. When you've now see how these hang test machines work, or they winch you up, you now still hanging in your seat, and basically the instructor's got to tell you to get into your seat, and so you lean back, and you're still holding on to the brakes, and you lean back, and the seat's supposed to come into your bum, under your bum. So if it doesn't, because it's not all machines are the same, then he's got to teach you, he's got to show you what you're going to do. You're going to take the hand that's not on the throttle and stow your brake, and you're going to put it on the back of the seat, and you're going to push yourself into the seat. That's one way to do it. But basically it simulates, and therefore we can do the settings. The settings on the swing arms are adjusted to set that angle of the dangle. Okay, so you've got to set the settings on the swing arms. Now it's important. This is why I mentioned the manual. Different manufacturers have different types of swing arms. Air Conception, for example, have made the torque effect. We're going to get into all these effects eventually. But to counter torque, you've got swing arms which are skewly manufactured. They're done for a purpose, to try and counter the torque. On Parajet, it's the connection points are a little bit differently connected, so not into the same holes. A swing arm has different holes. Look at those videos I'm going to put up, and you'll see that they oppositely put them a little bit away from one another, not the same holes, and that is to counter the torque effect that you have on the motor. So it's important that you read the manual when you adjust those points. Don't do it wrong. Get the angle of the dangle correct by making use of what the manual says and what the instructor tells you to do. So it's important on doing that. On the high hang points, I get back to that, you've got a bit of a lean back that you've got, but you've got different systems to counter torque. You've got either twist air or anti-torque. The flow of the air pushes the cage in the opposite direction of what the propeller is, what the engine is turning, and therefore you have it's sorted out with airflow, and you have an anti-torque belt which always needs to be tightened to make sure and the lean back actually is what you want to train with, but as you become more a professional, they actually set that lean a little bit forward, so you've got more effective thrust. So there's pros and cons to both, but you want that little bit of a dangle backwards, but it's not as essential, not as important, not as critical, but it's still there. You still have to do it. And if it's the right size harness, that's important as well. That's what you got to do. Okay, so you got to get that angle correct. On the harness settings, you want the harness to sit tight. You've got to have the anti-torque. If you've got an anti-torque belt, that's got to be tight when you're in a standing position. So you want to tighten the anti-torque belt. The anti-torque belt has got to be underneath the chest connection point. So there's a buckle and a chest buckle that you close in around your waist, and so the anti-torque belt's got to be below that, because if it's in front of it, basically that's going to push onto that and it's not going to get the full torque effect. So you've got to be underneath, connected underneath the center belt. So the anti-torque belt, not a lot of machines come out with that. It's the Nirvana that comes without the Nirvana Instinct, and the Airflight, the new Airflight with the full harness that comes out with the anti-torque belt. You guys are going to have a lot of questions on the anti-torque already now. You're thinking your brain is racked on torque. So we are getting into that, but we're now just setting up that your equipment is correct. When you're going to go to the school, then your equipment is right, and you're not sent home to try and fix whatever before you get back to the school. You don't want to waste your instruction time. Okay, so harness has to be the right harness. We've spoken about it. It can't be too big. It can't be too small. If it's too small, you can't get into the harness when you're flying. It's uncomfortable because the seat board is usually, if you're a small harness and it's a small board plate that you're sitting on, then your legs go over the board plate. And so when you're flying long distance and you're going to have your feet on the speed bar, eventually try and make up for it, but it's not as comfortable. You want a wider seat board to sit on, and you want to get into your seat without any trouble. Too small a harness means not getting into your seat. Too big a harness means gyroscopic precession and a lot of other trouble. And also, if it's high hang points, I've seen guys float in it. So it's like here where it's connected. So you literally can't turn your helmet or your head if the harness is too big. So you don't want that. You want the right size harness. And it does, there's a lot of safety issues connected with that as well. So the battery and the running of the engine. So if you've got a battery, I'm putting up the video here now and explaining that, showing that you've got to go test your battery.
So how do you test the battery? Basically, you switch on the Engadget. That's what we see on the Engadget. And you look out for the voltage on the battery. Now that voltage is pretty much a full charge. It can go up to about 12.8 volt. If you charge this battery and it gives you anything less than 11.2, around about that, you know you have a faulty battery and it's time to replace it. The thing about the new F-Lites is the fact that it's a lithium battery, and therefore these batteries do not last forever. I think that the Instinct battery is somewhat more dependable for long-term use, about 1800 starts, but the lithium has the advantage of being cheaper. Now this is a typical battery that we would run into, a situation run into. Battery is a 2020 model. Now these batteries can last a very long time depending on how many times you use it. And this one, for example, these NiCad batteries could give you 1800 starts or so. So they're very dependable, but it just depends on how you take care of them. So on the NiCad, you'll just basically set this. You need an intelligent charger in order to test or charge these batteries. You set it to a 1.9 amp charge rate, you set it to NiCad, and you do a battery check. It says it picks it up and it starts going up. Now let's have a look at that reading. Runs to about 16, 17, it's going up 18. Now that needs to get up to around 22. If you do not get close to 22 or more than 22, then you also know that your battery is kapuchki. It's not going to last much longer. So this one, we'll give it it probably will charge about an hour long, and you go through the same process with what you'll have on a LiPo battery, for example. I'm just using this one as an example. It's kind of stuck around that 19, but give it about an hour to 2 hours charge, and then see what it comes out, and give you a good idea if there's a problem with it.
What is battery? Battery is connected to electric start motors. A lot of guys prefer the hand start machines with a clutch, meaning they start at the engine with a clutch system. They pull the cord like a lawnmower would. You pull the cord and eventually the engine starts. If you've got the settings right. Now the engine runs in a little bit. There's no electric start button that you're going to press that'll start the engine for you. Some other people, like myself, I appreciate electric start, and therefore there's a battery connected to that. Different systems, Parajet, for example, LiPo battery, make sure that you charge it correctly. The way you do that is you get yourself an intelligent charger, and that charger has got a screen, and you set it to the type of battery. You do not put it on a 12-volt battery charger like you would charge a car battery, ever. You put it onto an intelligent charger. The charger switches off once the battery is filled up. To make sure that battery is in a good condition, I usually take the battery to a battery expert. The RC guys are fantastic with that. They're usually really good with that. But if you've fully charged the battery on an intelligent charger and the motor did not fire up, no go. Then there's something wrong. One of the cells are dead inside the pack and you've got to throw it away. It's important to know that in most engines, you do not start the engine without the propeller fitted to the machine, especially the computerized engines. You can get away with that on the clutch-based systems like the Parajet, Air Conception, whatever that's got a clutch on it. You can do that. You can start the engine. You can test the battery that way. But remember, if you're flying in Nirvana, you're not going to start the engine unless the propeller is fitted to it and the machine is on your back. That's very important, because let's say you buy your machine and you're going to start this out with not being with an instructor for the first time. Make sure the prop is fitted. Number two, the engine's on your back. You never ever start a machine on the ground. I don't care what you're flying, if it's clutch based or not. The simple reason is that it's happened a million times before, and most of the incidences of people getting hurt comes from the fact that they got chopped in the face because the throttle was stuck and the machine thrust it into their face as soon as it started up. So it is important to get that right. We're already half an hour into to this discussion, and I'm going to just cut this session short. After I've done the running in the fuel mix, and then we're going to get back into the same class 1, part 2.